Let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling a massive hurdle in language learning, that incredibly frustrating gap between memorizing textbook rules and actually talking to a real human being. You know the feeling, right? We're going to explore communicative competence in detail today, which is literally the bridge that connects classroom grammar to real-world fluency. I'm so glad you're here for this explainer.
So to really understand this, we have to look at a huge historical shift. For a long, long time, language teaching was completely obsessed with what Noam Chomsky called linguistic competence, basically just knowing the grammar rules, the pure nuts and bolts of a language. But then, in 1972, Del Hymes came along and dropped a total game changer. He realized, hey, just knowing grammar isn't enough. To actually be fluent, you need communicative competence. It's not just about knowing the rules. It's about knowing exactly when, where, and how to use that language appropriately based on who you're talking to and where you are.
And that brings us to our core definition. Communicative competence is your ability to use language appropriately in real, everyday social situations. It goes way, way beyond just passing a grammar test. Honestly, you can think of this as the ultimate North Star for modern language teaching. It's the secret sauce that takes a student from sounding like a stiff, grammar-reciting robot to a confident, natural communicator.
Here is our agenda for today. 1. More than just grammar. 2. The 4 key components. 3. Why competence matters. 4. Designing the syllabus. And 5. Evaluating real success. Let's get into it.
All right, section 1. More than just grammar. The historical shift. You know that universal problem where you memorize verb conjugations perfectly, but totally freeze up when talking to a native speaker? That's exactly what we're solving here. Moving right along to section 2, the 4 key components, specifically Canale and Swain's framework. So, back in 1980, researchers Canale and Swain took Hymes' big idea and broke it down into this brilliant, super practical framework. You've got 4 distinct pillars here: grammatical, sociolinguistic, strategic, and discourse competence. Think of these as 4 separate muscles. You absolutely have to exercise all of them if you want to carry a heavy conversational load. If even one of these muscles is weak, the whole interaction can just totally collapse. Let's build a quick scenario to see these 4 muscles in action. Starting with grammatical competence. This is the one we're all pretty familiar with, right? It's simply knowing the vocabulary, the pronunciation, and the structural rules to form a correct sentence, like knowing the exact syntax to look at someone and say, "Give me the pen." But then we layer on sociolinguistic competence. This is all about context. It's knowing you've got to adjust your tone to be polite or appropriate based on the specific social situation. Saying, "Give me the pen," to your best buddy? Totally fine. But if you're talking to a teacher or a boss, your sociolinguistic competence taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, maybe change that to, could you please pass me the pen?" Okay, but what if something goes wrong? That's where the 3rd pillar, strategic competence, kicks in. Let's say communication suddenly breaks down. Maybe the room is super loud, the teacher doesn't hear you, or there's a misunderstanding. Strategic competence is your survival skill. It's your ability to step in, point at the pen, use a hand gesture, and just say, "This one, please," to keep the message alive and actually get what you need. And finally, we have discourse competence. This is your ability to tie all those individual sentences, social adjustments, and hand gestures into one smooth, organized interaction. It's connecting your ideas into a coherent flow from start to finish, making sure your entire request makes logical sense within the flow of the conversation. Which brings us to section 3, why competence matters, and specifically, the danger of grammar-only teaching. The crucial takeaway here is why educators absolutely must prioritize all 4 of these components together. Look at this quote from our source material. It hits the nail right on the head. If a syllabus only builds grammatical competence, learners may know correct grammar but still fail to communicate appropriately or effectively in real life. If you only teach grammar, you're literally only giving students 25% of the tools they need. This is exactly why modern classrooms have to ditch the endless worksheet drills and move toward real, holistic, task-based teaching. Now, let's talk about section 4, designing the syllabus. Looking at Yassi and Bahar's practical model. It's one thing to talk about theory, but how do we actually build this into a curriculum? Well, Yassi and Bahar provide a brilliantly clear 3-phase roadmap here. It moves logically from a preliminary phase, where you figure out what's needed, right into a development phase to build the materials, and finally caps off with a review phase to evaluate the whole thing. It's a wonderfully clean cycle.
So we break it down into these 3 sequential steps. Step 1, the preliminary phase, which is your needs analysis. Step 2, the development phase, where you design the syllabus and materials, and step 3, the review phase for teaching and evaluating. The absolute best part of this model, it guarantees that the student's real-world needs are front and center from day 1 of planning all the way to the final exam.
Let's zoom in on that first step, the needs analysis. Notice how the designers make a very important distinction here. They separate finding out what language items students lack, which are their linguistic needs, from how those students actually prefer to learn, their learning needs. You really have to dig into both of these to create a solid needs inventory and set course objectives that you can actually measure.
To put that into perspective, imagine you're planning an English course for tourism students. Through your analysis, you find out they desperately need hotel and airport vocabulary. Boom, that's your linguistic need. But you also discover they hate boring lectures and learn way better through active role play. That is their learning need. When you fuse those two things together, you get a highly targeted course aim, teaching exactly what they need, delivered exactly how they absorb it best.
Taking those goals from phase 1, we can see how phase 2 selects topics and builds out the actual instructional blocks. For those tourism students, a designer would likely choose a competency-based framework, right? Because they need practical skills. So they develop lessons around real-world tasks like checking in a guest or giving directions. This is the phase where abstract theory finally becomes a tangible textbook or lesson plan. Finally, we hit section 5. Evaluating real success, which is the review phase. Developing great materials is awesome, but we have to actually prove they work in the real world. To do this, the model relies on Kirkpatrick's famous 1996 framework for summative evaluation. This is way more than just handing out a final multiple choice test. It's a robust, multi-layered way to see if the training actually stuck. It breaks down into 3 specific levels. Level 1 is students' reactions. Did they actually enjoy the role plays? Level 2 is learning gains. Did their test scores go up from the start of the class to the end? But level 3 is where the real magic is, teachers' perceptions. Because true success isn't just a high grade on a piece of paper. True success is the teacher watching a student confidently, accurately direct a tourist to the airport, actively using their grammatical, sociolinguistic, strategic, and discourse competence all at once. So I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. The next time a conversation goes off the rails in your own life, whether you're traveling abroad or literally just talking to a coworker, use this framework to figure out exactly where the breakdown happened. Was it a lack of vocabulary? Did someone misread the social context? Was there a failure to connect ideas? Or just an inability to strategically recover when things got messy? Understanding how communication actually works is the very first step to mastering it. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.